WikiLeaks exposes North American integration plot. As early as January of 2005, high-ranking officials were discussing the best way to sell the idea of North American integration to the public and policymakers while getting around national constitutions. The prospect of creating a monetary unit to replace national currencies was a hot topic as well. Some details of the schemes were exposed in a secret 2005 U.S. Embassy cable from Ottawa signed by then Ambassador Paul Cellucci. The document was released by WikiLeaks on April 28. But so far, it has barely attracted any attention in the United States, Canada, or Mexico beyond a few mentions in some liberty-minded internet forums. Numerous topics are discussed in the leaked document: borders, currency, labor, regulation, and more. How to push the integration agenda features particularly prominently. Under the subject line placing a new North American initiative in its economic policy context, American diplomatic personnel in Canada said they believed an incremental path toward North American integration would probably gain the most support from policymakers. Apparently Canadian economists agreed. The cable also touts the supposed benefits of merging the three countries and even mentions what elements to stress in future efforts to promote further integration. It lists what it claims is a summary of the consensus among Canadian economists about the issues, too. Merging the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Integration is a little-used term employed mainly by policy wonks. But while it may sound relatively harmless, it generally describes a very serious phenomenon when used in a geopolitical context: the gradual merging of separate countries under a regional authority. Similar processes are already well underway in Europe, Africa and South America. And according to critics, the results essentially abolishing national sovereignty in favor of supranational, unaccountable governance have been an unmitigated disaster. But the U.S. government don't think so. In North America, integration has been proceeding rapidly for years. The New American magazine was among the first to report on the efforts to erect what critics have called a North American Union, encompassing Canada, the United States, and Mexico. But more recently, the topic has received more attention. After the creation of the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, similar in many ways to the European Common Market that preceded the political union in Europe, the integration scheme has only accelerated, and the bipartisan efforts have been going on for years. Under President George W. Bush, integration occurred through the little-known Security and Prosperity Partnership of North America. And with the Obama administration, the process, now virtually out in the open, is only accelerating. Back in 2005, the cable released recently by WikiLeaks explained how it would be done. And looking back, the document was right on the mark. Moving forward. The best way forward, according to the cable, is via gradual steps. An incremental and pragmatic package of tasks for a new North American initiative, will likely gain the most support among Canadian policymakers, the cable states in its summary. Our research leads us to conclude that such a package should tackle both security and prosperity goals, the document claims, using the two keywords that have been emphasized at every step along the way. This fits the recommendations of Canadian economists who have assessed the options for continental integration. Toward the end, the cable offers more advice on how to advance the integration agenda by tailoring the narrative. When advocating the North American initiative to integrate the three countries, it would be better to highlight specific gains to individual firms, industries or travelers, and especially consumers, the cable states, noting that it is harder to estimate the benefits on a national or continental scale. Unsubstantiated claims. In the section headlined North American Integration, What We Know, the cable offers nothing but praise for the merging of the continent's once sovereign nations that had already been achieved. Past integration, not just NAFTA but also many bilateral and unilateral steps, has increased trade, economic growth, and productivity, it claims, despite the fact that countless economists disagree. Of course, True free trade advocates also correctly point out that the thousands of pages of regulations making up the agreements should hardly be considered examples of genuine free trade. So-called security, the other big integration selling point, is featured prominently in the document as well. A stronger continental security perimeter can strengthen economic performance, the cable states. It could also facilitate future steps toward trilateral economic integration, such as a common external tariff or a customs union. And law enforcement cooperation is good too, the embassy and the U.S. ambassador claim matter-of-factly. Cooperative measures on the security side, a critical focus of current bilateral efforts, can deliver substantial, early, and widespread economic benefits, the cable alleges, offering no evidence to substantiate the assertions. Security and law enforcement within North America have evolved rapidly since 9/11, it continues. Collaboration to improve these processes could yield efficiency improvements which would automatically be spread widely across the economy, leading to general gains in trade, productivity, and incomes. The alleged consensus. According to the document, many economists agree with the scheme. The cable says they support the principle of more ambitious integration goals such as a customs union, a single market, and even a continental currency to replace the dollar. On top of that, they supposedly believe such a union should involve all three major North American countries: the United States, Mexico, and Canada. The cable cautions, however, that most of the economists believe the gradual approach is most appropriate for now, at least. And all of them apparently agree that such an approach helps pave the way to these goals if and when North Americans choose to pursue them. The embassy cable also included a summary of what it calls the professional consensus among Canadian economists on various issues related to integration. At this time, an incremental approach to integration is probably better than a big deal approach, the document states under the process subheading, supposedly referring to the economists' opinions. However, governments should focus on choosing their objectives, and not on choosing a process. Next in the cable is the question of border versus perimeter, as the formerly secret document puts it. Even with zero tariffs, our land borders have strong commercial effects, the embassy said. However, some of the effects such as law enforcement and data gathering are described as positive. Canada and the United States already share a security perimeter to some degree, it is just a question of how strong we want to make it, the 2005 document notes. Apparently Canadians' main reason for seeking a perimeter approach to security and borders, as opposed to a border between the two nations, is to avoid the risk that discretionary U.S. decisions to stop terror or disease might impede commerce. And evidently, the nation's rulers did decide to make the perimeter stronger. As the New American reported in February, U.S. President Barack Obama and Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper met in Washington, D.C., to hammer out a deal on solidifying the common perimeter around the two countries. Also part of the agreement, which conspicuously bypassed both countries' legislatures, was a diminished role for the nation's shared border. The development of a biometric system to track North Americans was agreed to as well, as were numerous other controversial measures. In terms of labor markets, the so-called consensus among the unidentified Canadian economists is also a surprise. The pursuit of even more integration. Many Canadian economists point to labor markets both within and among countries as the factor market, where more liberalization would deliver the greatest economic benefits for all three countries, the document states. Next, the cable release by WikiLeaks highlights another startling proposition about how to achieve an end run around the Canadian Constitution. Interprovincial differences in regulation are important here, since Canada's federal government does not have the benefit of a U.S.-style interstate commerce clause, the document states. While much of the problem is domestic in nature, an international initiative could help to catalyze change. Yes, the U.S. Embassy referred to the wildly abused and misapplied Commerce Clause as a benefit that Canada lacks. And it actually suggested, hiding behind unnamed economists, that the constitutional problem could be minimized by foisting an international initiative on the Canadian people. The cable also claims the economists support a customs union, a feature developed in the European Union once the integration process was well established. A common external tariff, or a customs union which eliminated NAFTA's rules of origin, RU, is economically desirable, it states. And finally, the document summarizes a consensus on the subject of a currency union. It said the supposed economists were split on the issues of returning to fixed exchange rates or even abolishing Canada's fiat dollar and replacing it with American Federal Reserve fiat currency. The cable gives the final word on the topic of a currency union to the Canadian central bank boss. He is quoted as saying that, "Monetary union is an issue that should be considered once we have made more progress towards establishing a single market." Secrets, backers. The scheme to merge North America into a political unit with its own legislature and currency is largely the brainchild of the World Government Promoting Council on Foreign Relations. But though documents leaked earlier this year revealed that governments were trying to keep the process under wraps, integration is now proceeding out in the open for the most part. Where the campaign will eventually end remains to be seen. But if North American Union advocates get their way, the U.S. Constitution and its Mexican and Canadian counterparts could soon be rendered irrelevant. After that, plugging the regional units into a global system would be a relatively simple matter, critics and supporters both argue.